any further ado, you are a second-year European football star from a minority community playing for a major football club in the north of Italy. You are one of the best players at your position in your entire sport and have a long career ahead of you. Your football club, like many others, has a very large active contingent of fans that advocate for an ethnically pure club of only white Italian players. They consistently taunt minority players both on and off the field, often employing racist songs and chants and doing other terrible things like throwing bananas on the field. You have won your first 2 games of the season and have made several complaints to management and ownership to no avail whatsoever. While walking on the field for your 3rd game, those chants begin anew. You are signed to a long-term contract. OPP Choice, do you stay on the field to finish the game or walk off in protest? We will protest. You're going to walk off? Okay, cool. Second. Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we obviously think this was the wrong decision, and we think that it's, first of all, not going to have any impact in the way that you want it to, but will actually affect you in a numerous amount of ways that will be long-term and will be very bad, and you won't actually get what you want out of this type of protest. 3 arguments today with a lot of subpoints. First of all, impacting racism in your sport. Second of all, competitive benefits. And third, I'm going to talk about, so you're going to walk off, right? I just totally started on the wrong side, my bad. First, consequences. Second will be obligations, and third will be alternatives. That was irresponsible. Okay. All right, so first, into consequences. You stand to lose a lot by making a public scene. You're going to become a pariah and not just to the racist. And this is the first point here. For the large bigoted section of fans that are part of the problem, you become the embodiment of the problem, right? You are a star, and they probably don't want you on that team. But there are tons of other players that also face this. You are basically going to become the martyr for this type of cause. I don't think that's ever something that you should engage yourself in for a host of reasons. But second of all, this is not a region of the world where these sentiments are particularly rare, right? There's tons of racism in these types of areas that are that's incredibly prevalent and incredibly damaging. I think that it's a mistake to think that things can't get worse for you. First of all, because you become a symbol for it. And second of all, because those people which do actually support you or aren't convinced by this type of hateful rhetoric are going to be very angry in a way that is going to probably spur them to treat you differently as well. I also think that this impacts the fans that aren't actually racist, right? Because notice that these guys are going to see a situation where their team has won a couple games and they have a chance of having a very good season, right? You're a great player and they have probably all the hopes of doing very well. Insofar as you walk off the field and you damage their ability to win one game in a sport where every game matters because you are basically given the ability to win based on the ending record of your sport, I think that these people are going to become furious, right? They might not think that the way you are treated is correct, they might not think that the way you are treated is fair, but they are going to they're not going to treat you as well anymore because you are taking it out on them. They're now going to see this as you blaming them for the racism as opposed to them actually being treated the way they think they deserve, which for not having a complicit part in this. I also think third in this point, that this makes life for you far worse in a very tangible way. You aren't getting out of this place, right? You have a long-term contract. So this isn't just feeling bad for a little, being bad off for a little while. This is the place where you live, the community in which you're engaged in, and all of the types of people that are in there. This is bad for you and your family and all the other minorities that live here because your team becomes the symbol of this. That means that all of these people have harder lives, including yourself. I think that that's bad both for yourself and your family and the teammates. Third of all, I think it has serious competitive ramifications, right? The team is obviously less likely to win. as someone who has dedicated your life to a sport, I think you probably want, in part, your legacy to be about how well you did at that sport. This is something that is always going to be attached to you. And perhaps you do want to be someone who targets these types of things. But I don't think that you necessarily want to be the type of person who is never remembered for the thing that they dedicated their entire life for. You have a huge risk of that on their side of the house. I think you could also spur some drastic consequences from the team itself. The team isn't going to take kindly to the fact that you did this. So you risk the team involved, like having the coach actually sit you more often, having the institution suspend you. There are all kinds of things that they can do that you can't actually respond to. That's really bad. I'm going to talk about obligations. I think you have obligations to 5 different parties in this case. You have an obligation to your team, an obligation to the different fans, and you have an obligation to yourself and your family. First of all, to the team. These guys that you are playing with are not the ones who actually engaged in these types of actions, right? They are not the ones who actually engaged in doing any of the harmful stuff that went on. They expected you to play with them, they wanted to play the sport, and their actual livelihood relies on that. You need to realize that when people prepare for a sport, when people are playing that sport, in a team game, it does matter who you are playing with and how well that person plays. You make these guys look worse, and you make yourself less likely to win, which has impacts on all of these other people. And if you get suspended or any other type of thing like that, that has even more long-term effects on them. Basically, you get exactly what the racist fans wanted, which was you not playing, while all of the other guys suffer both from the increased attention, the increased racism, and not being able to be as competitive. I think that's really bad. Second of all, your obligation that you have to the fans. So I do think that there isn't just these racist fans. There are a large portion, and believe me, like, they're vivid and they're very active. But I do think that there's some benefit to having the minority kid see you persevere and play extremely well in these types of scenarios, and not to actually have a scenario where you walk off, get suspended, and these guys have a tangible impact and ability to take you away from the game. I don't think that you necessarily have to just pretend as if nothing's happening. You can make signals, you can do any type of thing, but when you walk off the field, it dramatically increases the message in a way that no other action could. I think that's really bad for those types of fans. Obligation to yourself. I think this was pointed out beforehand. You are going to live much worse off, right? I think that insofar as you have an interest in having a happy life and having some form of quality of life, you should not put this burden on yourself very quickly.
Okay, so why would the team's immediate reaction be to suspend this person rather than actually try to keep their best player by trying to get the racist fans to stop?
Because first of all, they can trade you, they can do all numbers of certainly terrible things in terms of actually dealing with you, and they're going to be massively embarrassed, right? I don't think that all of a sudden a team that had no interest in actually changing any of the rules, changing any of the things to accommodate you, is all of a sudden going to start catering to you and doing all of those sorts of things. But best on their side of the house, the team starts acting nicer, you don't get suspended, but everyone else in the community is actually more angry and does these sorts of things. Even if you don't get suspended, all of those harms still exist. Let's talk about alternatives. First, I think that what you can do is go over management's head. I think it's totally possible for you to look to other options to try and achieve your goal, but not doing it in a public way. For instance, you can go to ownership, you can go to the league, you can go to any number of types of people and have a conversation with them that isn't actually confrontational or things like that. I think that insofar as you do that, first of all, the management might not have been cooperative. But an owner has an interest in seeing his star players stay there, and he's probably not attached to the daily actions of the team. And second of all, if you go to the league, many of the teams in Italy don't have these problems and are negatively looked upon because of what happens in these particular places. That is going to allow the league, if you make a good enough case, to take actions that affect them. Last of all, we think that you can threaten to take actions and not actually ever take them. We don't think that you should ever take this embarrassing action. It's incredibly irresponsible. We are proud of you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank Brent for starting off with the wrong side of the case and giving me and Aislin the incredibly unintuitive argument of fighting racism, which we will reference repeatedly. Before that, I want to get into responding to everything we've heard coming out of Brent's speech. The first thing he says is these racist fans will really hate you when you're causing the team to lose. You become a martyr for the cause. These fans will make your life hell. Firstly, insofar as they're already racist and you are not of the race they want that club to be purely of, the ship has kind of sailed on trying to get them onto your side. The marginal harms that come with them being increasingly hateful to you, you're not going to experience their racism in a different way. Like what, is it going to be a higher octave of chant you hear now when you're walking onto the field as opposed to what you're hearing now? Is it qualitatively going to be a different kind of slur? I don't think this is actually an impact he talks about. But moreover, what me and Aislin are going to show to you is if you actually want to stop those racists and stop that discourse and make life better not just for yourself, but other people, this stance is the best one to take. The second thing we hear that's great is your competitive legacy as a soccer player is going to be harmed. Let's weigh this comparatively. On one hand, we have to buy Brent's dubious claim that your legacy as a soccer player is tied to your performance in the third game of the season of this particular one, which is how sports pundits and fans will remember you based on how you played in this one game. That's ludicrous. Let's weigh that against the fact that a singular act of protest like this is likely remembered for far more longer, and you stand to be a symbol of someone who stood up to racism in a way that scoring a goal, 2 goals, or a hat trick never could. Then and other things about this, if you are actually affected by these racist chants repeatedly, you may play worse in light of these racist chants, which means your competitive legacy might be hurt. And thirdly, specifically with the case of soccer, it's important to note that even though you're obviously an excellent player, it is a sport as compared to sports like basketball or hockey, where your immediate ability to shine as an individual is far more constrained looking at those sports. I don't think the value of playing this one game is that much. He then talks about the fact that the team can do terrible things to you. He says that they can have a tangible impact on you, they can suspend you, etc. Here's the problem with this. The team management and team ownership keeps their jobs, gain revenue, by putting a competitive team onto the field. At the point where they see clear impacts to that competitive success, I think what is more likely is they take measures to kick out fans who chant out of those games. It is far more likely that they take the other measures they can to actually combat the type of racism than risk the competitive product they put onto the field actually being risked. He then says that, they can trade you. If you're a star second-year soccer player, being traded wouldn't be the worst thing. Firstly, as Brent would probably agree, you're leaving northern Italy. Actually, southern Italy sucks. Never mind. You're leaving Italy. That's great. You may go somewhere else. Very nice. But being traded would not be the end of the world. It would be, if they went for that option, I still think you'd go somewhere with less racism and more exposure for you as a soccer player. He then says, go over the head of management, negotiate. But at the point where you've given them no actual consequence, your position doesn't have any real dialogue effect with this other person if you haven't shown that you're willing to actually stand up for them. Go ahead.
So you embarrass the team publicly, make a scene out of them, and then they trade you, but they're going to trade you to a great place and not some second-tier football club where you have absolutely no profile ability to do anything.
Why on earth would they trade you to a second-tier football club? The kinds of offers that are going to come for you from big football clubs who are giving millions of dollars and great players are going to be far better for that team. They're not going to trade you to a second-tier team, assuming they're going to trade you anyway. And this discourse about embarrassing the team, let's be very specific about this. When he says embarrassing the team, he means in the eyes of people who are already embarrassed by the fact that it's not ethnically pure, right? I don't think the kinds of people he's talking about are really the ones we want to be catering to. Let's talk about 3 constructive arguments. Firstly, your legacy. You stand in this position as an athlete on a divergent path. On one hand, if you choose to go out and play this soccer game and continually play under racism, your legacy might be nothing more than an obscure answer to a quiz-up category that will come up soon on Italian soccer players. On the other hand, if you take this stance and walk off the field in the face of protest, you stand to be the face of the fight against racism in soccer as someone who actually stood up to fans that are not just present in Italy, but present in leagues all across countries where soccer is played. The fact that you can become the face of this movement, being not just a player affected by racism, but a star player affected by racism, means that you are far more likely to be remembered as a person who stood up to racism in a legacy that will endure for far longer than your sporting accomplishments will. Also keep in mind they're not mutually exclusive. You can still have great sporting accomplishments, but I think that the kind of long-term legacy you leave on racism is far more likely to be appealing to you and to other people. I also think it's important to understand the reason you might derive more pleasure from this kind of legacy is that it actually benefits people apart from you. When we strive in our search for a competitive legacy, it's kind of a selfish act. We want to rack up stats. We want to be remembered as a great player individually. But this kind of legacy that you pursue allows you to be someone seen not just as fighting for themselves, but someone who's fought against a systemic problem plaguing soccer in a way that will be far better. The next thing to understand is how these fans are actually going to react. Because we have to have a more realistic conception of what soccer fans look like. Firstly, even those fans who engage in racist chants are not necessarily purely racist in the sense that their overriding priority must be to express their racism at the expense of all other possible priorities they may have. They're also largely fanatical followers of that soccer team who wanted to do well. The reason they currently engage in racist chants is there is no consequence to their other priorities and the other thing they want to see when they engage in racist expression. But if we conceive of these people as more complicated actors than just be racist at all times, at all costs, that they may have other interests, no thank you, the fact that you bring those other interests into challenge means that it is more likely that they're likely to value, and many of them will value, being quiet and not expressing their racism in that particular arena in a way that makes soccer a more hospitable arena for all players involved. Also, insofar as not every fan there is even expressing racist chants, it's important to understand that the kind of a communal thing you have when soccer plays, like forums of particular fans of teams, the kind of discourse that starts there is more likely to be to quell racism. You're likely to see online petitions and movements and pleas by these people to stop these racist chants in a way that might appeal to them as well. And lastly, recognize that soccer teams can take steps like kicking out fans from games who are being racist. You probably love seeing soccer, that's why you're there. I don't think you are there purely for the purpose of yelling racial epithets. You probably want to enjoy a sporting experience. At the point where you incentivize the team to actually take these steps against you, everyone benefits by racism being combated. Next, what stance to send to soccer players everywhere? A number of ways. Firstly, insofar as it is very likely that other players around the world also suffer from this problem, you are likely to have the potential to start off a range of players walking off the field in protest when they're actually affected by this kind of problem. When a range of players starts doing this, racism as a systemic problem in soccer becomes far more exposed, far more talked about, and it is more likely to see actual changes in the way that people experience soccer in a way that's very useful. It is also very likely that your own team will come out in support of you, because they probably are sympathetic to the fact that you have gone through the kinds of racist chants that come out, and they're likely to be fully behind you in the kinds of steps you take that mean that every single fan there is going to be affected by the fact that people from the ethnicity they support are coming out in defense of you. That kind of expression is incredibly powerful in changing the attitudes of these fans when people from that ethnicity or your teammates stand up and support you. For all those reasons, I think walking off the field in protest is a correct choice.
Taking your first remarks, I invite Andrew to continue to go to case day.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So I'm going to do two things for you today as the MC of this round. First of all, I'm going to refute everything that we heard from Veenu, limited though the responses were to Brent's points, and then I'm going to rebuild Brent's points that are still standing and highlight where we are still winning this round clearly. So let's get to what Veenu said in refutation of Brent. First of all, he told you that fans already hate you. So we say that while some fans do already hate you, that probably the majority of the fans don't actually hate you. They want to see the club succeed. So insofar as that is true, we think that in terms of actually pissing them off more than you otherwise would, this is a bad course of action. Insofar as they never even touch the alternatives that Brent proposed to you in terms of what other actions you can take that don't actually piss off all these fans that you don't need to do, but you can still get all these impacts that Brent that they want and all the good benefits from our side of the house as well as theirs. They also talked to you that how legacy is not an important thing, but at the same time, in the same point, they told you how this is going to have a long-lasting impact. So we think that legacy is important, but we think that it is particularly important in this case, because insofar as you believe, or insofar as they argue that they're going to trade you to a good team, we think that the legacy and the message that you send right now is the most important part. So what they are doing is they are essentially saying that the view of you in the soccer world is not important, but that the other GMs are going to find it important, and that this is not going to negatively affect your view in any way. We think that this will negatively affect your perception in the soccer world, and particularly in northern Italy, where this racism is more prevalent than in many other parts of society. Insofar as it drastically impedes your ability to actually get to a good team, we think that it is very important that you consider it. The final thing that he touched on is basically that teams the team can do a bad thing, that basically the competition is not the biggest thing, and that being traded is not that bad. So first of all, we think that being traded, particularly after you've just settled down in a area, is a bad thing to do. We think that what you were trying to do is settle down roots. You're trying to build the fan base. You think that the majority of the fans are probably good, that they do respect you, that they do like you, and that you have that mutual respect for them. This is a minority, albeit a vocal minority, that you don't like. So we don't think that that is a reason that you should abandon them. But we also don't think that it should be your obligation to have that be abandoned and take on the burden of having to move to a different club, to a different country, even as they suggest. We think that should you want to play there, and this is where you wanted to play because you chose to play there, we think that you should be able to continue to play there without racism. And Brent told you about all the alternatives that can happen. Veenu never addressed them. We hope that there's a response out of side opposition pretty soon. So that this all sort of comes down into one thing, and that the management is going to take responsibility and actually do things that'll get fans and kick the fans out of the thing. So my question to you, Madam Speaker, is basically why haven't this action happened already? We think that you've gone to management. It's like clear in the case construct. You've gone to management already. You've demanded that this changes. We think that if management has proven that they don't want to actually take responsibility and actually kick these fans out, then it's probably not going to happen. That they even may have some racist tendencies themselves underlying these tones. If they're not willing to take these actions on their own, we don't think that you have to take this drastic action to make it happen, and you ought not have to do that. I'll take Veenu now.
What consequences, apart from an uncomfortable conversation, does your option of just talk to management actually have for management?
Okay, so that is not all of our options. Let's look at the alternatives that Brent mentioned at his speech that you never even addressed. So first of all, you can actually go to the media, you can talk to the fans directly and say, we want you to stop, we want to take more responsibility in this. We think that the majority, you can appeal to the vast majority of the fans to help quiet it without actually walking off the field and doing that. We think that you can go above them to the league management and actually have the league sanction the team in order to make them do it, again, without actually negatively affecting your perception, without negatively affecting the performance of your team, without negatively affecting your own personal well-being, and without negatively affecting the portrayal of minorities in the community and the already racist undertones that are existing in the community as it exists. We also think that you can quietly negotiate a transfer. This is another option that you can do without actually impacting your value. This is like if you go and actually demand trade from your management behind the scenes without actually making a scene. We think that you can get out of this situation if that is all the benefit that they derive from their side of the house, which we think is all they've basically proven at this point. I'll take one more.
Yeah, and how does that fit with all your earlier claims about trade being really bad?
So the thing that makes the trades bad is that you have negatively impacted your value on the trade market. So insofar as you won't go to a good team, insofar as you won't get as much in return, insofar as they are less likely to trade you for the value that they want, it is less likely that that is going to happen. We think that the best course of action, should you think that a trade is the best option on side government, is to do it behind the scenes without negatively affecting your trade value so that both sides can go to the places that they want, play where they want to play. We think that is fairly clear. So what did Brent tell you that was never addressed? They never addressed the family. We think that there are massive impacts on your family. We think that your family has to live in this community and actually exist. And we think that, like, your wife, your children, these sorts of things have to come into your calculus as a football player. And we have to think that they must be able to live in this community. They never talked about how this is going to actually affect the minority perception in the community. We think that this is only going to provide fuel to the fire that, of the racists in the community that said, this guy just simply abandoned it. He couldn't take it. We think that this is a stereotype of all the minorities in this community. That gives that fuel to the fire that they would not otherwise have. We think this is a harm that they haven't addressed either. And then finally, so Brent basically talked also about that all of these harms, we also think finally that you have the obligation to your team because they are the ones who have provided you with this opportunity to be this star player. We think that insofar as soccer is a team sport, you cannot have just a star player winning soccer game after soccer game. You need to have the team support, and you also have the obligation to make the people around you better, to pay them back for being the good teammates that they are, for paying them back for the support that they do offer you. We think that insofar as you are abandoning them to the rest of the game and potentially to another team, as they would have you do, we think that that is incredibly harmful to the actual teammates that you have right now. We are very proud to propose this motion.
Thank Andrew for his speech, and invite Aislin to continue the opposition case.
Madam Speaker, I think the Thai government needs to decide what they think that the impacts on this player are going to be under this model. Because they say, look, you are necessarily going to have to get traded and that is bad for you. And then they say, well, this trade could be good for you, but you can only get it if you don't actually walk off. What Veenu and I stand for is that we actually think that this is going to mean you do not have to get traded and that the negotiations between you and the management are going to become much more clear and concrete. Furthermore, if you do get traded, you have a much better option of where you get to go and how people treat you and view you where you are there in terms of the types of offers that would be coming from teams like that. I'm going to get into a lot of refutation of basically everything we hear outside Gov and then deal with a lot of what they say in response to media. So the first argument that they say, that they talk about is that you have a lot to lose, that you are going to be a martyr for this particular cause and that that is necessarily bad for you. I would argue that it is most certainly not bad for you as an individual to be seen as the face of a particular protest for some other individual. If the issue is that they believe that you should not give up something for a larger group of people because that is necessarily bad, I think that that's wrong. I think that if you as an individual value that particular sacrifice, insofar as Veenu and I think that you should, in terms of how it impacts you, that that's necessarily good. But furthermore, I don't actually think that it should only be about harms mitigation for you as an individual, insofar as you subscribe to a group that is being massively undermined, both by management of an organization and by fans within that stadium. I would say that you as an individual might possibly feel bad about contributing to the success and ongoing success of an organization that is going to continue to make people like you feel terrible about who you are in terms of an immutable characteristic. I think that maybe you would then want to make that organization better for them, and having leverage and having the ability to influence them by actually making tangible consequences is probably well within your interest and something that you should do. But furthermore, they talk about wanting your legacy to be good and that you end up tarnishing it. And this goes twofold. They say, first of all, tarnishing your legacy is bad for you as an individual, and second of all, it means that less teams are going to want you if they end up trading you. You're not going to get a good trade. Now, I think the first way we respond to that is that the legacy that you want doesn't have to be competitive or exclusively competitive. Rather, it can encompass a lot of things, and one that has a lot more longevity. I don't really think that they give you a response to Veenu's argument about why we actually think that the legacy of protesting this is going to be much better for you as an individual and more long-term than your competitive success. But even if you want competitive success, there's no reason why you end up having to sacrifice that. We'll deal with management later. Second of all, if they say that this is going to be bad for your trading prospects, that teams aren't going to want you because they actually did that, or that management isn't going to want to give you up to a good team because they want to punish you, I have a couple of responses to that. First of all, I think the only teams that aren't going to want you are the ones who are going to be racist to you and therefore actually risk you walking off the field. No. But second of all, I think that this team, if they are going to recover from the loss of one of their best players, needs a lot of money and needs a lot of things that are going to only come from a good trade, not giving you to a tier 2 team that's not actually going to be able to pay anything for you if they're ever going to try and win again. So I think that either way, if you end up getting traded, which you don't think that you necessarily will, it is better for you and you're going to go to a better team for you individually. No. So furthermore, they talk about the management. They say, look, the management has been, the management has not helped you now. The management is not going to want to help you after. They're going to want to punish you. I think that the management has a lot of concerns about the competitiveness of their particular team and how they end up performing. So I think that that actually is primary, right? So the reason why we would tell you they haven't currently taken measures against this is because it's probably expensive and hard to hire people to kick people out of a stadium. And they don't really have any consequences to their bottom line yet. So there's no reason to do it. At the point at which you walk off the field and you are not going to be contributing to the winning of that team and the gaining of money, that's probably a lot more worth it for a management to consider those types of options. Therefore, I think that they're probably going to do that more so than they would otherwise. Go ahead.
Ostensibly having this large section of racist fans hasn't made this team particularly attractive to, for instance, free agents or players who might want to come to. They didn't respond to that incentive. Why are they going to respond to yours?
Well, clearly they have a person who is having racist chants against them, who is one of the top players playing for them. I don't actually think that they necessarily think this is a massive amount of consequences. It might be some of one, some of the other. I don't actually think that they end up doing that, and I don't actually think that it ends up being that. But at the point at which you have a player already who is contributing to success, who has trained with this team, who you've already put in a bunch of valuable assets to, I think that you're probably more likely to want to get return on that investment from those people. So they say, look, you have a responsibility to your team and a responsibility to your fans to deliver for them. I don't actually think that you necessarily have to forego the comfortable aspect of your identity in order to allow people to enjoy good soccer games. Rather, I think probably for the fans, that it's probably the fans that care about you, and the moderate fans aren't going to necessarily be give backlash against you. Rather, probably the racists who are making you uncomfortable. I don't think it's like automatic to jump to the person who actually ended up doing that. I think more likely you're going to do that. And in terms of your team, I think if your team supports you, that the team is probably also going to want management to change insofar as they want to keep you because they've learned playing with you and you make them win games. I think that that makes a much bigger bargaining group also at the point at which they stand. They end up standing beside you. So then what we hear is, look, you shouldn't have to, like, they bring back up the point about the family, that you're going to really harm your family by doing this, that the community is going to end up hating them. I think it's a really interesting message that you send your kid when you say, look, these racist chants are really bad. If you hear them at school, it's really bad, but you just have to deal with them. And protesting isn't the best thing in terms of certain situations. I think that that's a really probably problematic situation to tell your child to the point at which you want people to take you more seriously and you want your family to feel that way. I think that's good. They say, look, you can talk to the media and you can tell fans to stop. I think that the more jarring image is telling fans to stop, else you will not play for them. And I think that they don't really respond to Veenu's idea about the competing interests. Do you really care more about being racist, or do you care more about the team actually winning? I don't actually think that being racist gives you as much of a return as having your team winning. I think that a lot of the incentives mean that they will stop in that case. So furthermore, let's deal with what they say in response to Veenu, because I don't think it's much. First of all, we talked to you about legacy. We say, look, if you are standing up in the face of egregious violations of your personhood and your identity and what you've ended up constructing for yourself, we think that that is much better for you as an individual, being confident in your particular choices, but also we think that you still gain positive outcomes from being a good soccer player, either continuing to play for this team should they change the management, or trading to another team that's going to respect you more and provide you with more things. Furthermore, this makes the team actually have to provide you with more in order to get you to stay. I think that this means that the fans' reactions are better, that your reaction is better, and I think that this ultimately impacts everyone better than staying.
Okay, I think it's the first speech by Veenu to close the opposition half of the debate today. You're here.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to talk about two things: your legacy and the effect this has on racism. In terms of your legacy, proposition tells you a number of things. Firstly, that you have an obligation to the competitive success of you as a player and your team. What we told you in response to balance against this was this is one game in a season. The third game of a season, we don't know if it's a consequential game. The impacts it will have on the perception of pundits of you, the consequences it have on your team are not necessarily that big. But what they never do is engage with what we tell you about the potential for you to leave a legacy as the forerunner and leader of a movement against racism, not just because you are affected by racism, but you're a star player standing up against it. The personal benefits that accrue to you knowing that you are helping other people of different ethnicities, as well as what you will be remembered by in that sense, are far more likely to be good. The only response they give us is to say this is completely contingent on management cooperating. But it's not, because that image of a star player leaving the team will live on in the media and the images of people without management ever having to do anything. So even if you don't buy a thing about management cooperating, that image, that what you'll be defined by and remembered by, is far more likely to live on. the thing they give you in response to this is backlash. But this is very weird. We've already told you that, qualitatively speaking, racists are probably going to be racist against you, and the incredible difference in this policy is not going to be much. What they tell you is the majority of fans who aren't racist are going to hate you. But I don't think that's how moderate fans operate. Is a moderate fan, when he hears a soccer player at a press conference saying that he's the victim of vicious racism and thus not going to play, do you think a moderate fan is actually going to look at that and blame the player or blame the racists? And it is far more likely that the backlash will be directly against them and not you. Then we have the issue about trade. Firstly, to clarify, our stance is not that a trade will certainly happen, but even in a world where it happened, it would not be the worst thing for you. They say that trades suck for a number of reasons. You're uprooting your roots and moving to a different place. Wholly contradicted by his argument that you should secretly negotiate a transfer. So elements of them are certainly contradictory. But then they tell you that your trade stock will fall. Your claim is that big European clubs will be wary of signing a player taking the incredibly controversial stance of being opposed to racism. I think a club that your trade stock would fall in front of is probably not a club you wanted to go to in the first place. Then we hear about the effect this will have on racism, the second theme. They tell you management will not listen. Here's the problem with this. In the status quo, when you've gone up to them and negotiated, you've never imposed on them any consequence, any effect on competitive success. I think that's why they're unlikely to take the steps that are required to actually address fans who are being racist, steps that they can take but will not when it's just an uncomfortable conversation versus losses piling up in the loss column. But what they never engage with in the effect on racism point, which is usually concerning, is the change this has on fans. Because the conception they have of racist fans is that fans who engage in racist chants only do so because their only maxim in life is to express racism at all times. I think even these individuals are more complicated than that. I think it's likely they have a series of priorities about wanting to maybe express racism, but also want the team to do well. And it is likely that they're less likely to engage in it when there are consequences to the team. But also when your teammates stand up in front of you, and people from their ethnicity are telling them that their actions are hurting the team, that is when you also see a psychological change in fans that is not contingent on management doing anything. Because I think it is better for your legacy and the effect on racism in the league as a whole, we beg to oppose.
Thank you for your speech, and invite Brent to conclude the semi-final round here.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Two themes, impacts on racism and personal obligation. I'm going to start with the impacts on racism. So they tell you this is going to make you the face of the struggle, and that you're going to get a lot of attention and have positive outcomes in these areas because you're going to place a consequence on the people involved. Here's the problem with this argument. All of the rhetoric that they gave about you leaving a legacy and doing all of these things is just based on intuition that it's going to become a situation that all of a sudden all of these fans are going to care about. They never give you any reason to believe why a team which has a section that is dedicated to the ethnic purity of this team is all of a sudden going to respond to the consequence of you walking off. Note that this is a place where all of these people have been treating you terribly to begin with. There's no reason to believe that this is going to go beyond the local context of Italy, where all of these types of things are actually that bad. It's not as if racism on their side of the house just started happening when you walked off the field. Bananas have been thrown onto the field, chants have been happening for all of this time, and there has been no response. All of their material about this having impacts relies on you believing that the fans will react in some type of way that they give you no mechanism to believe will actually ever happen, insofar as it hasn't happened before with all of the racism that has existed. Highly problematic for their kids. But why else is this a pretty bad argument? Because we give you alternatives, and this is bad for a team that's usually great at reputation, that could all actually really impact this type of thing. Going to the league, going to the ownership. These are things that you could do that don't rely on the incentives of, for instance, that one in particularly bad actor, right? We tell you that the league has an interest in the image of the entire place and the image of a ton of teams. Insofar as they have that, they are less concerned about, for instance, one region of the country that is incredibly racist. I think that they needed to respond to our alternatives about how you could have impacts if these things were actually happening. They said that you need to make them act, otherwise nothing will actually exist. I think I told you about why you don't actually give them any additional incentive. But why is it important that we give you a lot of personal impacts, right? Because insofar as you believe, you would have to believe that they are actually going to change the way that people look at racism in this country, that it will have a meaningful impact, and that people will start acting differently, and the fans will be able to get kicked out of stadiums to believe these things don't matter. Because all they say is, what message does it give to your kid when you tell him, listen, you're walking out in these instances and you don't need to respond to this. You don't need to, you're not doing anything about it. No, you're doing something in a different way. I think that we tell you that you can't act in a different way. I think it's really trivial for them to suggest that you can just make this sacrifice and that that's something that you should be willing to do. It's very easy to suggest someone will have to face the entire brunt and focal point of these people and become literally the martyr, should be able to just deal with it in these types of instances. I don't think that they ever actually engage with those harms besides trying to trivialize them. But let's continue with this other point, right? Because they talk about the trade, and they say that we contradict ourselves when we say that a trade would be bad, and then say that later you can quietly negotiate for a trade. Yeah, that is true if you look at the worst version of our argument. What we actually told you is that when you are going to be traded in a situation where the team has been massively humiliated, they don't have any actual incentive to help you. When you do it quietly, you can actually advocate on behalf of yourself in a much better way. We don't think that that's necessarily the problem. Madam Speaker, this is why you should.